Hi everyone and welcome. Today we're joined by Lasha Kasradze, who will discuss what is going on in the South Caucasus. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much for having me back, Glenn. Appreciate it.
So you're an analyst, located in the United States, but you're from Georgia. And this is an interesting part of the world as it's lodged between Russia and Iran. And of course, Western countries have been involved in fighting both of those countries, which is why this is a very strategic region. The Prime Minister of Georgia himself argued that the Western countries would like to pursue a regime change so they can use Georgia to use it as a second front against the Russians. But again, today's topic, the South Caucasus, and the big news, I guess, taking the headlines is Azerbaijan, who has a physical border, of course, with both Russia and Iran. I guess maybe could you give a bit of an introduction of what's actually happened in Azerbaijan for people who might not have been paying attention?
Yes, absolutely. So we all know the official story. We all know the official story when on June 27th of this year, Russians in Ekaterinburg conducted a raid on what's considered to be sort of a criminal underworld individuals. The last name is Safarov's, and the brothers Safarovs, among others. And Brother Safarov's passed away during that raid. And this was a brutal operation by Moscow Russian security forces, security apparatus. And it was responded almost immediately by Baku when order was given to raid Sputnik, media station, Russian media station in Baku that arrested Russians as well as I believe it was also Russian citizens of Azeri origin also. And they paraded them around in streets with visible signs of physical abuse. And a lot of folks are saying that the response that, Baku's response and arrest of these individuals, these individuals had very little, if anything, to do. They were basically IT folks, tech folks, but symbolically, I think the damage was done. And then, so now everyone is asking a question, sort of, why did this happen? What's behind it? Obviously, there is something behind it. And to a large extent, the problem has the problem is what has always been, which is the geopolitical shifts in the region. I would say that there are several aspects to this. There is geoeconomic and geopolitical aspect to this, and on the geoeconomic front, the Zangezur corridor plays a big role. The Zangezur corridor, for those who might not be familiar, is a geoeconomic. It's a geographic region connecting Azerbaijan mainland with Nakhichevan region, which is sort of on the other side of Armenia, which is wedged between the mainland Armenia and Nakhichevan region. And then it continues on to connect Azerbaijan with Turkey. And it's an extremely important area that sits basically in the northern Iran. Iran is part of this. And the conflict now is about stakes, who takes which piece and which state will be able to actually have control. There could be a group of states in the region, or there could be, I highly doubt there will be a one state that will take control of this region. But it is further split within sort of what it's called the Turkic world. led by Erdogan in Turkey, that protects Azerbaijan in the region. We all know how closely Turkey was supporting Azerbaijan's second war against Armenia vis-a-vis Nagorno-Karabakh, when Azerbaijan basically acquired militarily Nagorno-Karabakh and restored its full sovereignty. Erdogan and Turkey was behind it in terms of helping Baku and Aliyev's government to achieve that strategic aim. So Zangezur corridor is part of that Turkic world led and advocated by Turkey in the region. The part of which is Azerbaijan, linguistically linked, obviously, with Turkey and culturally, and Central Asian countries that Turkey considers to be as part of its sort of new vision to influence, to increase and sort of earn back the influence in the old Turkic world, which it had always viewed that it had some sort of natural right to influence, except that when the Soviets took over, that those ambitions were curtailed. But then after the breakup of the Soviet Union, gradually, even though Turkey was had officially declared no problems with neighbors policy, it eventually ended up sort of bringing back that notion of the Turkic world in the region led by Turkey. And so now we are here witnessing what seems to be this Turkic world, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and which is increasingly perceived, rightfully so, with its alliance with the collective West. And on the other side, Russia, Iran, sort of, opposing and balancing against this development, because Iran, as we all know, does not want the Zangezur corridor to be out of the equation of the Zangezur corridor, because then it will lose its relations, its geostrategic and geoeconomic access to Central Asia and Russia and Armenia. And if Iran is excluded from this, Armenia will also be excluded from it. And so that's the basic sort of contours of regional balance. So geoeconomics and geopolitics combining forces, if you will, in order to delineate, strategic interests of individual regional states. There is another dimension to this, which is India. And India is, crudely speaking, to put it very in simple terms, is on the side of Armenia, and it's very much invested in making sure that this Zangezur corridor does not fall under exclusive influence of Western powers vis-a-vis Turkey and Azerbaijan. Why? Because India too needs access to Central Asia and through Russia. And part of the way that it can achieve this is the Chabahar port that India is building vis-a-vis Iran to reach sort of that north-south corridor that will take it eventually to the European markets through Central Asia, Russia, and European markets. The idea is that and then it also obviously is competing regionally with Pakistan, which supports sort of the whole Turkic world line, strategic line that is connected and supported by the West. So India also stands, India's interest in preventing Iran or Armenia sort of losing this corridor also stems from its competition with Pakistan. Um, but mainly concentrating on the region of the South Caucasus, the big question is where is Russia on all this? And I'm going to stick to my guns basically and say that Russia is still very much etched within the region. I know there has been lots of talk um, about Russia losing its grip on the region. To a certain extent, that is true, occupation with Ukraine. But I think that Russia is. To a certain extent, will have to compromise and play its game. But when it comes to hard power compromise or security compromises, I will go back to my old story and say that Russia will not give up Armenia, given the fact that it has become tempting to view Armenia now as a sort of a new problem for Russia, as Yerevan is trying to, in an unprecedented manner, really, ally with Turkey. Um, Basically acquiescing to its previous requests from Turkey that it recognize Armenian genocide. Basically, it's looking the other way, and so Pashinyan's visit, I believe it was just maybe a few days ago to Turkey and with Erdogan, symbolizes something that is, I believe, very superficial. And then, as we all know, France is behind it, and England, Great Britain. So this really rings the bell of the great game, is sort of the grand chessboard. Brzezinski's grand chessboard comes to mind. The great game comes to mind. The 19th century, the famous geopolitical games that the British Empire was playing against Russia. And so here we have this, this turmoil, if you will, quiet turmoil, but turmoil nevertheless that raises risks. But going back to my original implied thesis is that this is all done basically to surround Russia. This is, Ukraine is part of this equation, and now the South Caucasus is becoming sort of returning to those principles, those explanatory principles, if you will, of traditionally being used as a geopolitical space to surround Russia. I don't see any other way of looking at it. But then, sort of the umbrella idea, the umbrella explanation of all this is, on top of all this sits this idea that you have China. And you have China in the world where we all know is splitting, is molding itself separately as a Eurasian geopolitical space from the West, where Russia is the central power in this particular case. China is very carefully watching this. And I highly doubt, and just recently, I think it was a statement made in China that China was not going to back down, would not be willing to see or will not accept seeing Russia on the losing end of this equation. So we see direct support of China, at least political. We also know that militarily, and then through North Korea, China has been on the side of Russia, helping Russia. But mostly on a more grand strategic scale, China is not backing down, and it sees Russia as a partner, strategic partner, if you will, of sorts for the time being, where it can not just walking into the minefield of this Western designs, and instead understand better vis-a-vis Russia, sort of have Russia as an offshore balancer, if you will, as a remote neighbor. Or the sort of the Western Russia, Moscow, for example, as a remote strategic tool with which to test the ground, balance against the West, and so allow itself sort of enough strategic space to tread very carefully against these Western designs in the region. This is not to say that China won't use pragmatism. China, in my view, is also concerned with the need that it has, geoeconomic need that it has with the West. It needs the West for its Belt and Road initiatives and the rest of the sort of geoeconomic plans that it has for its economic growth, if it wants to facilitate that or continue to facilitate that economic growth. But at the same time, China is looking at sort of achieving this goal through good old-fashioned geopolitical sort of backing by Russia. And so they back each other, both Beijing and Moscow, in this regard. And by the way, Russia also is very much, to argue that Russia is completely forgetting the West and pivoting to China, it would also be a mistake. But for the time being, I think both states are linked now strategically in sharing their common opposition to what is happening in Ukraine and now in the South Caucasus.
There seems to be some possibility for miscalculation, though, for the West. I think that the overarching strategic picture now is taking on a new Cold War as we're fighting the Russians in Ukraine. One looks for new openings in this proxy war, but it looks as if this rush to back. Use this conflict with Azerbaijan as another way of isolating Russia, that this could backfire immensely. As you said, the Zangezur corridor intended to connect Turkey with Azerbaijan as part of the Turkish world and also project and power perhaps further into Central Asia. It's primarily something that would strengthen the hand of Turkey, but the assumption is that the interest will coordinate with the rest of the political West. Furthermore, in this part of the world, if one would push Russia or Iran, for that sake, too far, it's very difficult to project power for the West in this part of the region. And if there would be someone wanting to use Azerbaijan as a proxy, they did win a very spectacular victory over Armenia, but they're a relatively small country. If they would egg on both the Russians and the Iranians, this could end very poorly. I've heard a lot of criticism from Iran as well lately, that Azerbaijan has been involved and could take a more central role in another attack on Iran. You see now the very aggressive rhetoric and actions taken against Russia. This is a very exposed position. Surely if this would actually result in military conflict, this wouldn't be good for the West. Also, if it would end up just strengthening the hand of Turkey, to what extent could this backfire on the West?
Yeah, I mean, throughout history, we've seen how either through the Ottoman Empire, how British, the French, they would use Turkey to achieve their respective goals against Russia, to control the Black Sea, to control Dardanelles, and then until the Sykes-Picot Act, that eventually gave control of those waters to Turkey. But then they would also, abandon Turkey. They would, in parallel, they would wish for the Ottoman Empire to collapse. And so this is, Turkey has to be also very much. Turkey also has to be very much aware that uh, you know you know this is just transactional, in my opinion, alliances, because I don't see um, where this can go. I mean, history kind of doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, they say. But what is Turkey is a NATO country, yes. And there was a conversation that Turkish NATO forces might be stationed in Baku. Um, I I think that's absurd. I mean, that's a ridiculous, laughable proposal. And the idea that Russia will stand by and do nothing about that, I think it's it's just not a serious hypothesis. But uh, much less what Armenia is doing, right? What is Armenia doing here? That's where I'm confused about. How it, what gives Armenia the reason to think that it will be protected in terms of security, that the West will protect it? And now they're saying that Russia is losing Armenia, which is illogical. This is not. Russia is not losing anything, really. In relative terms, Russia might play some sort of a compromising game, but the idea that the collective West, France, will find some sort of a place for Armenia within the West. We were going back in that vicious cycle. This is a very similar story to what was happening in Georgia. These promises that basically led to 2008 invasion of Russia. August of 2008, where Russia basically recognized, Georgia ended up losing the war, of course, when Russia recognized Samachablo, South Ossetia, and Abkhazia. So strategically, Georgia went from bad to worse. So what is Pashinyan hoping to achieve with this? Adventurism is beyond me. I think this has no substance, no strategic substance, and cushion, if you will, no strategic hope, where they will say, okay, take a risk, but then here we are. We are going to take care of you, accept you in one way or the other, and provide you with security guarantees. Nothing of the sort has been a promise has been made by the West. And then the idea that Armenia will find a long-term strategic relationship with Turkey, um, given Turkey's history of flipping and balancing and jumping from one side to the other regionally, playing its own sort of national security and national, implementing its own national interests as Erdogan sees fit, so does not comport with what they're telling Armenia to do. Sort of this fake encouragement. So I hope Pashinyan sees the sort of the sinister side to this. Um, uh, that the West is not really waiting for Yerevan to save it one way or the other. So it has to be really, and then once Russia actually, once this special operation is finished, and it will be finished one way or the other, it's going to be a military solution. It won't be a political solution. It seems like. Russia will remember who decided to sort of, who decided to betray, if you will, its interests in the region, and which South Caucasian country was, tried to, uh, you know, jump on the other sort of the Western into the Western camp. Um, so I would be extremely careful. I think, but just to touch on Georgia, of course, I think Georgia is playing a smart game here. I think making given the fact that Georgia's security is non-existent and it has no security guarantees, um, and luckily, with geopolitical and geoeconomic position that it has, a geoeconomic position, in my opinion, mostly because geopolitically we know where it stands. Um, I think Georgia will remain to be within this equation, even with Zangezur corridor ending any which way. I think Georgia's stance within the region as a bridge between the East and the West, and in terms of the geoeconomic and cultural sort of aspect of it. Um, but it is staying under the strategic radar, and it understands the stakes that are involved. Stakes are very high, risks are very high, and given the fact that the West hasn't been able to accept Georgia, Tbilisi understands that this is a very dangerous game, and I think it has to stay uh, within sort of a sort of a neutral balancing uh, position, where it is not viewed as being sort of tilting its foreign policy from one side to the other. Um, but Armenia, so is a deadlocked country, having no security protection guarantees other than Russia, right? Historically speaking. Um, it tries to sort of pluck itself out from this mosaic of like, very competing interests, has to ask itself where it's hoping that it will be placed if it leaves its own position, its traditional position. Um, so and then and then Russia is the main question here. And I'm going to go back again to my thesis and say, uh, geoeconomically, Russia will be much more flexible. In the 90s, it was Russia that was sort of excluded out of these geoeconomic projects. And yes, it will be a blow to Russia if it loses this whole game on the Zangezur corridor, and sort of Azerbaijani, Turkish, and then Israeli, sort of a tandem takes over the control of the Zangezur corridor. But it won't be good for Russia. Russia recognized, it's recognized in Moscow that it has to have some sort of a control over this corridor, um, vis-a-vis its support for Iran, and then Iran's support for Russia in the region. They need this corridor. But when it comes to security, I think those red lines are red lines, very bright red lines for Russia. They remain to be. So any talk of possible stationing of Turkish troops in Baku, or which is NATO, is absolutely unacceptable for Russia. And even though it's preoccupied with Ukraine right now, I think it will go to great lengths to prevent that from happening. And then the question will be what will come off of Armenia when it will become very quickly know that not a single Western power, will protect Armenia if the situation escalated to that level.
I think that's a great point. Again, some of the things that seems absurd with this is, as you mentioned, Azerbaijan is making itself very exposed in this region. But Armenia, this is probably the most difficult thing to wrap my head around, because they have two historical partners in the region, which is who looked after their security, primarily Russia, but they also had a good relationship with Iran, and they're more or less under Pashinyan turning their back on both, which is in that region strengthening Azerbaijan and Turkey, which, and they just fought a war with Azerbaijan, and Turkey, of course, as you mentioned, is hardly an historical friend of Armenia. They looked as if they can be, made irrelevant, if not crushed under this new format. And it all appears to hinge on this idea that somehow the West will come to the aid of Armenia if they would require it, without any clarity why this would be the case. I mean, there was no one came to the aid of Georgia when it was required. It's a very difficult region to project power in, but it's also the desire to do so on the doorstep of both Russia and Iran. There's so many unpredictable consequences there. But if you put the other Western countries aside, I guess my last question was on how do you see this impacting the relationship between Turkey and Iran as we're now looking towards possible this spinning out of control, pulling in many different kinds of actors, because the Iranians are also quite worried. Not only is Russia worried about the possibility of NATO troops being stationed on its border in Azerbaijan, but now and cutting off some of its connectivity with Iran, but now the Iranians are also concerned that Azerbaijan can be used more as an instrument of the West in future wars against it. So of course they also have a lot of reasons to be distrustful. So how do you see this possibly playing out? I'm assuming they won't sit idly by either.
No, absolutely not. I think I think there will be a further split between Turkey and Iran, but Iran has so some sort of a geopolitical arsenal, if you would. India won't. I don't think India will tolerate seeing Iran go under, giving the natural resources, and China, given the natural resources that these two countries buy from Iran. And I don't think Russia will allow these declarations in the past have been formally made. Um, uh, by Iran's president, who's got an Armenian sounding last name. I completely just forgot. Apologize, but um, Shaki Shakishan. I just cannot recall it on the top of my head. But both Moscow and Tehran have sort of recognize the importance of supporting each other. It's not a formal alliance. We all know this, but it's a strategic. It's sort of a political alliance, and one way or the other, they will support them each other regionally. And India will also support, Iran's access to Zangezur corridor, in my view, and its building up of the port of Jabahar as a gateway to Central Asia and Russia. India does not need or won't, in my opinion, tolerate Iran going under any circumstance. So Iran has some cards to play here. Um, uh, but then this is going to be egged on against the whole Turkic world strategic line that is seen as being supported by the collective West. Azerbaijan, Turkey, and then Israel. Israel, perhaps mostly for its own purposes, for its own traditional views on Iran, but nevertheless, sort of the blowback effect of that will be. And by the way, when Israel hit Iran's nuclear facilities, immediately, conversations started about these being an attempt, a further sort of down the road. This was going to become an attempt to surround Russia. Uh, my argument was that first and foremost, this was Israel's decision to do because of rightly or wrongly its own interests, traditional interests in sort of delaying the development of the nuclear weapons capabilities in Iran. But that can very well be used, and the idea that we can exclude the possibility of that scenario developing without the West's calculation that this could be a good opportunity to surround Russia. I think that would be a mistake. I think this is also a part of this whole process. But but at the same time, I think Iran can play a hand here um, in terms of resisting losing strategically its presence, its influence on the Zangezur corridor, which would isolate it. Basically, it would then Azerbaijan would go directly to Turkey and into the Mediterranean and Europe, um, excluding basically locking Iran. Um, but there are other alternative ways that Azerbaijan offered, sort of as to quote unquote, perhaps deflate tensions. For example, building another pipeline on Aras River. Um, but I think Zangezur corridor is the most important strategic geoeconomic asset, potential asset that Azerbaijan and Turkey have. So I think if we go back and read statements within the foreign policy elite of Iran, how important Zangezur corridor is, we can see the conflict here ensuing with Turkey, um, uh, backed by Russia, and given that Russia sort of quote unquote lost Syria, I think Russia will cling on Iran much more strongly than it was able to do with Syria. So I think this game is far from being over, and I think everybody's sort of getting ahead of themselves. That's what bothers me. This is the excitement is starting to set in, and this sort of harks back to the memories of sort of pre-2008 time period when Georgia was sort of going hysterical that, NATO was going to come in and, you know, pluck it out of the South Caucasus and make it its member. And then we all saw Putin's speech in Bucharest, and then the rest is history. Um, so, but towards the end, I just want to also say that I think China plays an enormous role in this, and what Russia is doing in Ukraine is also, it also means that there's a China is in the back of Putin's mind. How Russia ends Ukrainian war will mean a lot for China and the relationship between Beijing and Moscow. Yes, Putin is sort of trying to balance sort of a multi-vector regional policy here, but let's not make a mistake. Let's make no mistake thinking that just because it's overextended, if you will, and has strategic obligations to a country like China, for example, that it will lose its grip on Armenia or any foolish talk of NATO troops present in Azerbaijan will be acquiesced by Moscow. I think that's a very slippery slope and very foolish policy to believe in, let alone pursue.
Yeah, that's my great concern. This many people see this as almost like an opportunity to find another
Correct.
dagger in the side of Russia. I don't think they thought this one completely through, how horribly messy this could be, and not just the vulnerability of the key actors like Azerbaijan and Armenia, but of course pulling in these other giants on the Eurasian continent as well. So yeah, anyways, Lasha Kasradze, thank you so much for shedding some light on this and sharing your insights. It's I have a feeling this won't be the last time we talk about this issue. So thanks again.
I hope so. I hope it will be last time, because this whole region has sort of a magnetic pull, if you will. If there is a conflict in Ukraine, or if there is, if the neocons are up to something, somehow, some way, it all boils down, sort of rolls over to this region. It's a critical region geopolitically speaking, and always worth analyzing and talking about. So thank you so much, Glenn. It was great seeing you again.